I think that what strikes me from a sort of strategic or intelligence or security standpoint is that we're wrestling with some very fundamental issues that are critical to our security, and which you would think are really a matter of common sense, but we seem to have gotten ourselves tangled up politically to where we cannot take common sense actions. The border would be a prime example. You know, a country that can't control its borders doesn't stay a country very long, and yet we seem to have somehow talked ourselves into a position where we can't quite see our way clear to even control that fundamental responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, now we've got this caravan still continuing to approach the United States. A second caravan of Central American migrants crossed from Guatemala into Mexico Monday. 5,200 U.S. Troops headed to the southern border soon here. It's just craziness what is going on out there. And for the president to say that he's going to stop this caravan, he's actually got critics from the Democratic Party, critics from the other side of the aisle. There used to be a time when securing the border was supposedly a bipartisan theme.
Yeah, yes, exactly. This used to be just a recognized thing that was not a partisan issue. You have to control your borders. You have to control immigration. Folks that are trying to, prevent us from doing that want to paint this in all sorts of strange colors, that this is about racism or something else, and it has nothing to do with any of that, right? It's just a very straightforward thing. We're a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. You either control your border or you lose control of the country writ large. It's worth noting, I think, that this caravan was created, organized, directed, and is being directed by a Honduran Marxist party aligned with Venezuela. These are all the usual suspects. This is what we would call in the agency a very large covert action campaign. It is not thousands of people just spontaneously marching on the border. We could also throw into the mix things like, at this point, drug cartels in Mexico control something like 45% of the landmass of that country. And Tijuana's gone over 2,000 murders for the year already, even though it's not a particularly large town. And there's nothing that automatically keeps all of that on that side of the border if you don't secure it.
Well, and speaking of Venezuela, I've kind of been raising the question here on this show. Hey, because we've got an alive and well Democrat socialist movement in this country, but it's not just the Ocasio-Cortezes of New York City. We've got Democrat socialists, self-described, that are the official Democrat candidates for even the Montana legislature here in our state. But if this socialism is such a great thing, then why are all these people fleeing it, basically?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw an article a couple of weeks ago how New York University in New York City was celebrating the 200th anniversary, or they were celebrating Karl Marx's birthday, and they had a whole big exhibit, and they were turning this into a fun thing for the students. And I just thought, this is an ideology that had brought us the gulags of the Soviet Union, communist China, labor camps in North Korea, the killing fields of Cambodia. How in the name of God do we still celebrate this Marxist ideology that has just destroyed nation after nation? And Venezuela is one of the latest victims of this. A country that's incredibly rich in oil, and yet people are having relatives in the States send them food boxes to survive at the present time.
Yeah, there's been stories about people basically going into prostitution just to put food on the table. That's how bad things are getting in Venezuela. So going back to the border and the caravan, that really has been the big question that everybody's been asking. Okay, who's paying for this? Who's funding this? Because I was watching Fox News when this whole story first started, and they were doing a live satellite interview with the guy from Univision TV who was there as all these illegal aliens were basically streaming past him. And I thought, these people are more nicely dressed than most of the folks I know. I mean, they got their fancy flat-billed hats on, their smile. I mean, it was like a big party wagon down there. And so just to repeat for our listeners out there, you say that there's clear evidence that this is all being organized by Marxists down there in cahoots, basically, with the Venezuelans?
Yeah, and there's no great mystery here. I mean, you can go online for yourself. In fact, you can go on social media. I would encourage everybody to go look on Facebook for the Facebook page of a guy named Bartolo Fuentes, who's affiliated with the Libre Party, who was the senior guy on the ground. He was thrown out of Guatemala, about 10 days ago. In any event, Bartolo Fuentes has given a whole variety of interviews and posted all over his social media, as have his associates, how the thing was organized. He was, until the Guatemalans threw him out, posting every day video and photos and updates on the organization and the movements of the march. You can find online where he's bragged about where the meetings took place. And again, he is basically the right-hand man, very senior official in a party called Libre, which is a well-known Marxist party in Honduras and was created by the guy Manuel Zelaya, who attempted to make himself effectively El Presidente for life a number of years ago, until the military threw him out. All of these guys have long histories with the Venezuelans. And it's worth noting, by the way, I mean, that's what's visible on the surface. I would assume underneath the surface, therefore, there is Venezuelan money. But also we should remember that the Venezuelans are completely in bed with the Iranians, that they give safe harbor to and assistance to Hezbollah. So the folks that are behind this is a very unsavory mix of people. Now, I am sure that the vast majority of the people who are actually in this march are folks that are just basically being used, probably lied to, probably told that the border will be open when you get there, you're guaranteed to get in. That's the way these things usually play.
Yeah, they just want to come to the land of free stuff, right?
Yeah, and they're being used and fed a line, because the whole intent of this is to make the United States of America look bad and to make our allies in Central America look bad. This is in agency speak, this is a giant covert action campaign against the United States, and it is organized and directed by folks that have been enemies of ours for a very long time.
And at the same time, they could use these thousands of people to try to sneak into this country as the ability of cover for drug dealers to sneak into this country, human traffickers to sneak into this country, and on and on and on. We're talking with Sam Faddis, a former CIA operative, joining us here on Montana Talks. We haven't gotten to the deep state yet. I want to get his take on the deep state. And plus, remember John Brennan, Obama's CIA director? Anyway, we'll talk about that and much more, but let's take a quick break so we can jump right back into it. All right, Aaron Flint here with Montana Talks. We're back with the program and joined here on the show by retired CIA operations officer and former chief of the CIA's WMD Terrorism Unit, Sam Faddis, joining us now on the show. And yeah, Sam, this is really interesting stuff here. You're talking about, the Marxist connections into the caravan of migrants that are trying to move north through Mexico into the United States. I mean, basically, it is an invasion. It's an orchestrated invasion, I think seems to be the best way to sum this up. But when you talk about the Marxist connections, I want to switch tracks here to talking about Obama's CIA director, former CIA director John Brennan. I mean, the guy actually admitted that he voted for a Communist Party candidate in the mid-'70s, and yet somehow ends up becoming the CIA director later on. I mean, I thought the communists were our enemies here for the United States, but apparently you can support their objectives and still rise all the way up the ranks. But anyway, maybe that's a different topic. But to me, the story that's kind of disappeared from the headlines is the targeting of political opponents. by the Obama administration using law enforcement and intelligence collection tools to spy on your political opponents. I mean, people should be going to prison over something like that. I would just assume that if you abused your post with an intelligence agency or law enforcement agency to spy on your political opponents, that would immediately lead to prison time. But that story has just kind of disappeared from the headlines here.
Yeah, and I would agree absolutely with you across the board. I mean, this is an incredibly important thing and an incredibly damaging thing. You know, you have to have, in your law enforcement agencies and in your intelligence agencies, you have to have a completely rigorous adherence to the law and to the Constitution. You're not serving, any political party in particular. You're serving the people of the United States. And there are lines you absolutely cannot cross, should never even contemplate crossing. And Brennan is a prime example of a guy who just blew all that off. But I mean, Brennan was a CIA analyst. He was never an operator. And at a very early point in his career, he got named to be the presidential briefer to President Bill Clinton, which means he was the guy who went down every morning and sat down with the president and basically briefed him on what had happened overnight. And he parlayed that personal relationship into a political alliance with the Clintons. And from that point on, he wasn't tuck off pretending like you are neutral or dispassionate. You chose your side decades ago.
Yeah.
And that's what you are.
And then he calls for the overthrow, basically, of the democratically elected president, and then wonders why he gets his security clearance stripped away. It's like, yeah, you can't call for the overthrow of the government, basically, and expect to maintain your security clearance. I'd hate to break it to you there, John Brennan. What do you think in general? One of the things I tried to stress is the spying operation, the Obama administration spy operation that was launched on the Trump campaign. We now we know the Steele dossier was a fake. It was phony. It was filled with all sorts of fake information that was used to justify spying on the Trump campaign. But I always tried to make the point that hey, don't listen to CNN and some of these other outlets when they say, well, the intelligence community is critical of President Trump. Look, some political hacks back in Washington, D.C. that happen to be holdovers from the Obama administration that work at higher up levels at these agencies are, they're the ones that are leaking this information and violating their oath. But I always try to be clear, hey, the men and women on the ground, the men and women that work for the FBI, and I'd imagine for all these other agencies out there, they do incredible work. They do fine work, and they're the ones who are being made to look bad because of some political hacks like Strzok and Page and others back in D.C. What's your thoughts?
I think that's a really important point. I mean, this is not an infection that spreads, far and wide to the vast majority of people in these organizations. Those folks are out there putting their lives on the line, generally for mediocre pay and no recognition every day. They deserve our respect. But clearly there are some people at the top who just completely lost the bubble if they ever had it. The FBI's the involvement of some of these senior FBI folks at the early stages of this Trump, whatever it is, I would say investigation, but it's a sham investigation, I find really troubling, and I don't think we have gotten to the bottom of it yet as to how early this started. They claimed initially that this was all based on the Steele dossier, as you said. Not only has it been discredited, but they've now had to admit that they were actually working this well before that came to light. So now potentially the point of genesis is meetings that Papadopoulos had with people, but it's unclear why that would have generated an investigation. I mean, in normal times, if you were in the FBI and you stumbled across something that threatened to pull you into the middle of a political campaign for president, unless it was really a smoking gun, you would run the other way, because the last thing on earth you would want as an organization would be to be dragged into that political mess. You would not want to be caught in that crossfire. And then obviously that didn't happen here. These guys were, some of them, actively going after Trump and his associates from a very, very early point.
Join the show anytime by calling the Rimrock Cabinet Company phone line at 406-294-0970. This is Montana Talks on KBUL AM 970 and News Talk 95.5.
All right, he was head of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center and the WMD unit at the Counterterrorism Center for the CIA, retired CIA operative Sam Faddis, here on Montana Talks with us. Sam, thanks again for sticking on the phone lines here for just a few more minutes with us. God, we could go on for hours. This is just incredibly insightful. So the deep state is real. Now the follow-up question is I guess describe the threat of the deep state, what it really is, how great of a threat it is, and then how we counter it.
Well, to start with, you have this conception, this machine that the founders built based on three, equal branches of government with various checks and balances. And nowhere in that conception is there a role for a bureaucracy other than to take orders from those three branches and carry out functions. And that's how they viewed it and how it was viewed for most of our history. You're in a bureaucracy, you're in an agency, laws are made, the president gives orders, you do what you're supposed to do. Now we have something very, very different. We have an unelected fourth branch of government in effect in these bureaucracies with folks at the top, in many cases, who decide for themselves what they think policy should be. And then no matter what the law says and no matter what the president tells them, they are then going to do their level best to carry out policies that they have decided upon. So unaccountable to anybody, uncontrolled by anybody, and now this bureaucracy is vast. It is not a handful of people as it was for most of our history. It's millions of people with huge sums of money and influence. So that means, to start with, you've lost control of a big chunk of your government. And then when you add to that the fact that they begin to not just decide for themselves what those policies are, but to ally themselves with particular political interests, as we have seen with the Trump situation.